Gutman Library, I would like to welcome all of you to this very important book talk. I would like to introduce David Stovall, who wrote the foreword to Black, Brown, Bruised, and is the Criminology, Law, and Justice faculty at the University of Illinois at Chicago. David?
Thanks so much, Mayan. Peace and greetings, everybody. I hope this finds everyone well. I hope your families are well, given this very interesting, bizarre, but promising moment. Today I've been tasked with providing the introduction to Dr. Ebony Omotola McGee's talk today on her book, Black, Brown, and Bruised. And what I hope to do today is kind of give us an understanding of not only why this book, but where Dr. McGee has actually taken us in relationship to understanding the necessity of this book. In addition to her being Associate Professor of Diversity and STEM Education at Vanderbilt's Peabody School, she has investigated what it means to be marginalized in the context of learning and in relationship to STEM. And a lot of times when people think about science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or if you refer to it as STEAM, this is often a moment that we see certain things becoming in vogue, but at the same time, very few questions have been asked as to why people have been excluded. And then with a few folks who are allowed in STEM, whether they be Black, Brown, Southeast Asian, or Indigenous, how they get marginalized. And when they become marginalized, what are we willing to do to address that marginalization? And in her work and how I've known Dr. McGee for almost 20 years, and what we've been talking about in our work is, if we know these things to be true, then what are we willing to do about it? And I'm overly joyed and pleased to see Dr. McGee has been one of the people to actually engage us around what can be done, why it should be done, and the ways it can be done. And it is a through line through all her work as she is coming to academia as a second career, given her original forays into electrical engineering, and now having that experience in the real world and then bringing it back to mathematics education. And now her work with PhD students who are in engineering and mathematics allows her to see the world from a very different perspective and then ask deeply critical questions of it, not just for the sake of critique, but to really engage in what change looks like in real time with the people that we care about. And in this process, she has co-founded two institutes, one being called Edify, which is the Exploration and Diversifying Engineering Faculty, and then the Institute in Critical Quantitative and Mixed Methodologies Training for Underrepresented Scholars. So this is a testament to her work. And then Black, Brown, Bruised is also reflective of that work, and then pushing us forward to begin to think about why this work in this particular moment, not just under the global pandemic of COVID, but under the three pandemics of COVID, white supremacy, and capitalism. And I'm deeply humbled and honored to be able to write the foreword for such an important document. And then as her work has been featured in the Atlantic, Diversity Issues in Higher Ed, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, NPR's Code Switch, the Huffington Post, U.S. News and World Report, and the UK Voice Online, I think it is important that we not give her her roses when she's long gone, but to give her her roses and her credit where credit is due right at this moment, because now, as universities are making this shift, we still see these pressures where Black and Latinx people are remaining to be bruised and harmed in a field that has historically rejected them. And I truly appreciate Dr. McGee's work in pushing us forward to understanding that this rejection is coming from a particular place and it must be abolished. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ebony Omotola McGee.
Thank you, Dave. What Dave didn't tell you is that he was my critical race theory teacher in my first year of the PhD program. So it is so dope that Stove be the one to introduce me, because he has actually read and graded some of the worst writing I ever performed. So I only hope this makes up for the torture that I put you through. I'm excited to discuss my book, but I can't do that without taking a pause for this moment. So this is my agenda. The agenda is I'm a Black woman in this country, and I'm hurting, and I'm sure that many of us are hurting for a variety of reasons. It's time to slay the lies that my life is lesser, that my skin is tougher, that my heart should suffer, that my mind is broken, that my kind is other, that I'm not your brother. So I wanted to start with this poem from Dr. Boluwini because she not only speaks my truth. What I like about her is that she brings her full authentic self to computer science and disrupting AI. And she represents exactly what STEM needs, the ability to bring our full authentic selves. And I'm going to explain why that really hasn't happened when it comes to people of color. But first, so guess what, y'all? Innovation is damn near dead. The economist Robert Jordan argued that everything that we view as new and novel, including the internet and the smartphone, is simply a variation of these themes that you see on the screen, and the pace of real transformative innovation has radically slowed during the past half century. And he is far from alone in this critique, in spite of some significant financial investments in research and development. Since the 1970s, there has been a drastically lowered innovation rate. Now, I know this might be shocking to some folks in the audience, but for me, it was actually very affirming because as a little girl, I thought that we should be flying in our cars like right now, today. And this provides some evidence that I might actually have been right with that claim. So if you examine the sum of the articles and their explanations behind these reasons for stagnation, they're pretty blah. I mean, okay, if you say so, but I certainly still had questions. And my questions having to do with, what about the legacy of white supremacy? What about anti-Blackness that runs through STEM? These last two are from a book that I co-edited called Diversifying STEM, where Danny Martin and his colleagues had the questions about the maintenance of the white frame that normalizes racial superiority in STEM. And what about knowledge and knowledge production being seen as not only neutral, but universal, innocent, objective, and definitely unconnected to power. So in STEM, we're really able to hide behind our biases and propel some false narratives of being objective as truth. So to answer these questions, I really had to go back. And most people go to Sputnik, and yeah, that was a thing, but I wanted to go way back. So when I think about the horrific conditions that 600 enslaved men, women, and children suffered for several months, I think about how that slave ship was designed, how the ship was engineered for dehumanization. When I think about the STEM industry in the United States being founded on slavery and genocide, and when I think about enslaved folks not only doing the labor of the STEM industry, but were directly involved in inventing the machinery and technology. And when I think about the poisoning of Indigenous people, I think about science. What chemicals were used? What herbs were used? Why did this happen? And who was involved in it? So now I hear my skeptics saying, well, why we always could talk about slavery? Well, because slavery is the foundation that STEM sits on today. So when you think about Dr. Rothstein in The Color of Law talked about highways, and highways being a racist legacy. It is a form of segregation. And that was one of the explicit goals of highway construction. Highways are more likely to bust through Black neighborhoods, and it's a lingering effect. Folks have more traffic crashes, there's more asthma, there's more police harassment. So when we think about the monuments and tearing the monuments down, we should consider the highway also a racist monument, particularly in urban neighborhoods. And we also need to think about tearing those down as well. You know, this is probably not as surprising to many folks, but the military is one of the biggest pollutants in our world. And the US military is the #1 pollutant. So when we think about where pollution exists, it often exists in Black neighborhoods, but we don't think about the role of the military in creating global warming, having pollution in communities of color. So cities have also been designed to maintain white supremacy. Dr. Pedro Noguera reminds us that there are no ghettos, no projects in Canada. So ghettos were created, they were designed. Just like race is an invention. I know people say it's a social construct, but I like to say to STEMers, it's an invention because we all know what inventions are in STEM. So this has a very outsized impact on our racial geography. I'm going to get to universities in a minute, but what about the transit system? It's essentially built on 2 different standards, where people using public transportation as a choice, and then people who are forced or dependent riders. And you can tell which one is Black and which one is white. And transit has been designed and policed for white comfort, reproducing structural racism in transit. So I remember being a young Black child in Chicago, and my mother made it clear that the whole city was mine, not just the South Side and the West Side. And I noticed I would get on the bus at 79th Street and it would be all Black. And by the time I reached the North Side, it would be all white. And the white folks were looking at me as if I didn't belong. Technology has also been designed to maintain white supremacy. Did you know that a racist, white supremacist, and eugenicist named William Shockley created Silicon Valley? Again, understanding the history is so important to unpacking the evolution of racist technology. So you have racism that are actually baked into the formulas and algorithms that doctors use to assist in making racist medical decisions. And even our children are being exposed to racism and white supremacy through video games and sometimes even children's apps. There's been a lot of talk about standardized testing, but did you know that DNA tests can actually amplify racist views? DNA tests are associated with racial essentialism. This is the belief that race is purely genetic and defines a people's core essence. I can't get a mortgage loan, or any loan for that matter. Credit scores, those are also biased against Black folks and other people of color. And dang, y'all, we can't even get into the weed game. Blacks are 4 times more likely to get arrested for marijuana possession, and being arrested eliminates you from being in this $77 billion industry. So if that hasn't convinced you that the things that happened during slavery leave a residue and leave a legacy, let me just show you a couple more examples. So the patent system is one of the ways that we innovate. Black inventors were often forced into American slavery, and their inventions have been largely ignored or stolen. But in addition to that oppression, between 1870 and 1940, we lost over 1,100 patent ideas from the Black community. And Dr. Cook says there are 3 reasons why we lost so many ideas during that time. Plessy versus Ferguson. Remember, this is federal and constitutional legal racial segregation, so that's separate but equal. Black people being terrorized by lynching, humiliated by racial segregation and Jim Crow, and are burdened with the contemporary forms of guilt and police violence, right? So this history has a current legacy that's happening too. And then the horrific Tulsa massacre, where white terrorists who by jealousy, white supremacy, and landlust terrorized and destroyed this beautiful area known as Black Wall Street. Historians say as many as 300 people died, 97% of them Black. Let's talk about universities for a second. Universities have an intimate relationship between science, slavery, and higher education. So Craig Wilder illuminated in his book, Ebony and Ivory, that the MIT founder basically lived a double life. So he was an abolitionist in the North, and he was a slave owner in the South. And how that relates to today is that folks are now critiquing this kind of optical white allyship that kind of serves as a surface level. You put Black Lives Matter, you change your hashtag, you put Black Lives Matter on your Facebook, but really doesn't go beneath the surface and is not aimed at breaking away systems of power and oppression. And it does not request folks in leadership positions giving up the power that they have. So we can see the antecedents living in these first universities where folks had to live double lives and really embrace slavery, but pretended that they didn't, you know, in this optical white allyship that we have in this current moment. So this has kind of taught me that the goals of the institution have never been to be diverse. The goals are to be elite. And what elite is, it can be redefined, but it's usually similar to what you're probably thinking about right now. So universities, we are fighting against the DNA of many academic institutions. And I want to erase the myth that these places of so-called higher learning are safe spaces. You know, Black and brown folks are rarely safe. So I was really curious to understand why people would shunt innovation. You know, I was raised on critical race theory and interest conversions that stipulates that Black people achieve rights and victories when white and Black interests converge. But in my reading of Cass by Isabel Wilkerson, she explains that enslaved people were penalized for their innovation. And her explanation is white supremacy trumps innovation. So if one had to choose between an invention by a Black enslaved or Jim Crow or even today person and white supremacy almost always wins. So this was very enlightening for me to know the reason why we don't have much diversity in STEM is because of the legacy of white supremacy. But her caste hierarchy, I've heard it before when it comes to mathematics education. My dissertation advisor, Danny Martin, talks about a racial hierarchy of math ability, an intellectual ability, as such as a proxy for achievement. So if you constantly read and hear about low performing folks, underrepresented folks of color, it begins to embed itself in the culture of STEM. Those who are not white are excluded from being at the top of the hierarchy and are excluded from positions of power. I know you see Asians at the top, and you probably want to know more about that. I'm going to tell you, I have a slide about that coming up. also the work of Rochelle Gutierrez, where she says that we as STEMers, we really need to check our superiority status, because what it's doing is it's harming us from looking at other fields as equally invested in STEM. So we don't look at the humanities, we don't look at sociology, we barely look at psychology, and psychology is a STEM field. And that we are really not going to be innovative until we take a more interdisciplinary approach. And this whole messaging around the US being a superpower and let's be China is not really resonating with folks of color who have different obligations and ideologies. And then there's not a talk that I go to where at least a few folks tell me with great emotion, as if it happened yesterday, that about changing their major in STEM. And Dr. Ayanna Howard talks about in her book, Sex, Race, and Robots, that bias has a price. And I would say racism has a price. Every year we lose untold numbers of scientists, thinkers, innovators, because they feel very disconnected with STEM. And they've often been told in overt and covert ways to leave your racial identity, your culture, your language at the door. And that is the pathway in. So I wonder how many people who love STEM might have been able to produce a cure for COVID-19, cancer, stopped or decreased global warming, or found a way to travel to the stars. Imagine how far ahead we would be as an educational system if we wouldn't have squandered or pushed out talent. Rich Milner talks about opportunity gaps. We're missing the opportunity to understand these students' experiences. These are people that you did not have to convince that STEM was for them, and they did not have an opportunity to succeed. And we don't acknowledge or study those folks. And I must admit that I don't study them either until now, because I just wanted to focus on success. I wanted to tell really wonderful stories about marginalized students of color achieving, faculty achieving, folks in STEM who are achieving. But even as I'm doing that, I have to problematize their success, because their success is very troubled. They're still doubted, they're still treated as anomalies, they're still stereotyped, and sometimes much worse. And when we look at the highest prize in the land, the Nobel Prize, we have never seen a Black scientist. Why would you want to be in a field where the top of the top looks like this? As Dr. Winston said, it's not just bad for science, it's bad for diversity, it's bad for innovation, it's bad for society. And people should look at this, of all the Nobel winners in science up to 2019, and really feel ashamed that we couldn't find just one of the thousands of talented STEMers out there of color to be part of this top prize. And I'm going to have to talk about big tech, because you just look at these headlines. These numbers have barely budged. In 5 years, they've barely budged. And they are just simply despicable. How do we let technology companies get away with these lowly numbers? Why aren't they aggressively trying to snatch up every Black and brown computing graduate? If they really wanted to, they could actually do it, because it's not like they're not doing things. I mean, Google achieved quantum supremacy. Apple put out a list of a dozen products, but somehow they cannot hire, or now the new term is, they can't find us, Black and Latinx tech workers in management. So I'm coming with all of this background, and I'm coming into my position at Vanderbilt in 2012. And I said, out of all of this madness, I'm just going to focus on one statistic, trying to move one statistic. And that was of engineering tenure and tenure track faculty. When I came to Vanderbilt in 2012, only 2.5 were Black. Now here we are with the latest figures in 2018, and it's 2.4. So even as I'm going through my own milestones, this statistic has remained less than stagnant. And 37% of engineering schools have no Black tenure and tenure track members. That means one can go through their whole career, and whole educational experience, and never see a person that looks like them. So let me tell you how I tried to tackle this statistic. One of the things that was important to me is understanding the stereotypes that Black students face in STEM environments, particularly the high achievers, because you would think that their achievement alone would give them entree to feeling as if they belonged in the field. But no, it's not like that. So Black students work twice as hard trying to prove the stereotype about their inferiority wrong. And Asian students, ironically, work twice as hard trying to prove the stereotypes about their superiority in STEM right. Now, they're both pressured to do this by stereotypes. One is the model minority, and I'm calling Black students everything that's not model, right? So this ability, this burden with being stereotyped and judged unfairly faces harsh conditions, like forgetting to eat because you're studying so hard, forgetting to sleep, having things like Bell's palsy where a side of your face is paralyzed. There are some serious physical and mental implications in working oneself twice as hard as the next person. Even if you are not actually working twice as hard, if you feel that you are, that is energy that is taken away from your ability to be creative and innovative. Now, interesting enough, Asian students make $30,000 more than Black students. So being model has some material advantage, even though it has a wear and tear. And I know you're like, 30,000, how can that be? You're exaggerating. Nope. Got this from the National Science Foundation indicators 2018. You see Blacks making 55,000 and you see Asians making 85,000. So the disparity is real. So now we can cut the myth of STEM being the American dream or the great financial equalizer for folks of color, because it's not. So there's so many things that I talk about in the book, and the majority of them are listed here. And of course, I'd love to talk about all of them, but I'm just going to focus on imposter syndrome for now, because this is a particular thorn in my side when I see how universities try to address it. So here's just one example of the health challenges that folks face. And a simple definition of imposter syndrome is feeling like an intellectual fraud, despite of overwhelming evidence proving the otherwise. And we all have been, or if you haven't, it's coming, the imposter syndrome workshop, where they tell you to breathe and say affirmations in the mirror and do a yoga pose. But the biggest thing they tell you to do is to change your thinking, because your thinking about being an imposter is wrong. And remember, it's imposter syndrome. So syndrome means that like you're slightly crazy, you know, something is not complete in your brain and you need to change your thinking. But Lord have mercy, 9 times out of 10 for underrepresented Black and brown folks, their thinking is absolutely right. The things that they describe and that they face in STEM departments is more than apparent. They are not crazy. It is not in their head. And you cannot yoga your way out of a legacy of 400 years of structural oppression. If we could have, we would have yogaed ourselves out of it already. And why is it the student's job, if the space is imposterism, why is it the student's job to fix themselves? Maybe there's nothing wrong with the student. Maybe there's something wrong with the culture and environment that it breeds imposterism. So if your institution creates the conditions, or your STEM department, that develop or foster imposterism, please stop asking students to fix themselves or breathe their way out of it. And please, departments, go fix yourselves. So I talk about a lot of stress and strain that underrepresented students of color have in their pursuit of STEM, but I thought it was also important to acknowledge the agency that they have and the things that they use, both kind of internal things and external sources of support, to try to maintain some sense of well-being. However, you will notice that I do not have the words resilience, nor do I have the word grit, even though students told me that they are resilient and gritty. This is because without dismantling the structures, they create the necessity for unending, never-ending levels of resilience and grit. What we're actually celebrating, and Dave and I are writing a blog about this, is Black and Brown high achievers' obligation to work themselves to death. Now, at this point, like, oh, she's being so dramatic. What I mean is premature death. So I'm talking about the Black engineers, the Black computer scientists, the Black lawyers, the Black doctors dying up to 6 and 7 years earlier than their white counterparts. So I'm also paying homage to Dr. Gilmore's definition of racism, which ends in premature death. So if our hard work and unrelenting levels of resilience and grit are killing us, why are we celebrating it? It's a slow death, but it's a death nonetheless. So I think we need to cancel that, because asking folks to be gritty without proper external supports for this legacy of racism is really just asking them to continue to be oppressed. One of the other things we looked at is mentoring programs. And I love mentoring. I have a mentoring program. So, not too down on mentoring program, but certainly I know what the limitations are. Mentoring can't fix structural racism. I mean, it might uphold a few people for a little while, but it's not a do-all. Sometimes it's very stigmatizing. It can be tokenizing. You have a lot of cross-racial mentoring in STEM, where you'll have a white mentor and a Black or brown student. And sometimes the white mentor even says, I'm going to save you, and not understanding that it is a mutually beneficial relationship. You learn from your students every day, and that Black or brown student could really be teaching you how to be a better professor, a better researcher, and likely a better person if you understand that you are also learning from them, as well as training them and mentoring them. And then Dr. Kevin Clay, so I got to have a Black moment here. Sometimes we have very caring, loving Black faculty say something like this: the struggle is real. I had to do it. I was the only one. You're just going to have to suck it up and do it. And this is a combination of, just put your blinders on, a combination between neoliberalism and a little color blindness mixed in. And many of the students are saying back to their mentors, if you had to go through this 25 years ago, and I'm still going through it today, what is the system going to do to fix this? It's just, why do we have to continue to be resilient to unending levels? Why can't we just be regular resilient? Like the next white guy. Like, why do we have to have these unending levels of resilience? So in my mentoring program that I share with Dr. William Robinson, of Vanderbilt University, we do some of the traditional things that a mentoring program does, but we also are very race conscious and we're race gendered conscious in our mentoring programs. So we don't pretend as though one's hard work and tenacity is going to help them navigate through these environments, even if they're so-called successful. If you're stressed out and you have anxiety, we don't think that's a good definition of success. And we don't want to put you in an environment without at least preparing you. I'm thinking about the work of William Smith that talks about racial battle fatigue. We're trying to give you some racial battle armor. And why do we still mentor doctoral students to get the PhD to hopefully get an academic position? Because we know faculty are the ones who teach the folks that work at the Googles, that work at the Microsofts, right? And having even a core group of faculty of color might be able to change the paradigm, or at least stop the excuses. The other thing that we developed is this framework that we're calling equity ethic. And we see it in both underrepresented students of color, and we see it manifest beautifully with faculty of color. And it is basically the desire to have their work impact the field, but also impact society, impact their communities. And a new concept that we're playing with in the equity ethic model is building from the work of Ellis Monk is linked faith, feeling that one's fate is affected about what happens to the other. So in this case, marginalized members of Black, Latinx, and Indigenous having a shared expression of racial consciousness and at times racial solidarity as a broad recognition of the consequences that are shared collectively by oppression. So I know that was a lot, that was a mouthful, but I'm going to show you what equity ethic looks like. All three of these scholars are pushing the boundaries of engineering, either by challenging the lack of LGBTQ affirming environments in STEM, and then career-long devotions towards increasing diversity in their fields. You also have folks who are doing spoken word. Dr. Robinson is actually using his PhD in nuclear engineering to fight for environmental justice. And Ayanna Howard is using robots for physical therapy on young people who have cerebral palsy. So these engineering professors and doctors embody the concept of equity ethic. But it's not to say that they don't have problems on the way. So first, let me just say, being a faculty is hard. It's universally hard. Not going to argue with you there. But if you are a faculty of color, you often have to deal with extra expectations, and you're not really awarded for it. Extensive service activities, educating all communities about all things diversity, often obtaining negative teacher evaluations, and even being overlooked by top graduate students. You have to still prove yourself not only to your peers, but sometimes you have to prove yourself to your own students. So this is just a sampling of some of the research that I talk about in the book, but I want to get to the last part of my presentation where I kind of talk about, so what do we do now? These are, if you believe they're real problems, how can we tackle them? So right here, what you have is a STEM, white male STEM supremacy table. And you're just like, well, what about those 2.5 folks of color? Okay, great, here they are. But as you can see, they're still very much on the periphery. They have a seat at the table, but they really don't, almost tokenism. So what can we do about this? Well, I used to think that we could just break the table, right? And breaking the table represents the implicit bias workshop, sometimes hiring a chief diversity officer for engineering or for STEM, teaching folks how not to hire the same people over and over again, not to hire their homies. But what I found with these types of things that are really worthy pursuits, But usually 3 to 6 months later, somebody's gonna come up with some super glue to glue that table back together. And the glue is gonna be so strong that you're gonna have difficulty breaking it again. So we don't need to break the table. We've got to dismantle the table and rebuild. So that looks like people of all genders, people of all backgrounds, people of all sexual orientations, building the table that can, with people in STEM and beyond STEM. So the whole STEM and educational workforce should be designed to be more equitable with the goals of celebrating diversity and innovation. And you gotta start it off with history, because a lot of people don't even know that they're continuing the racist history that STEM was founded on in this country. Okay, so you're not really done. Once you have inclusion at the table, now we need equity. So to sustain and memorialize this newfound diverse and inclusive foundation, the table, we need practices and policies to sustain the foundation. So now you might be saying, why is reparations one of the suggested policies? Well, after 400 years of not being a part of the STEM infrastructure, helping us, and now we're helping you to rebuild your institutions and companies, that's not enough. We need reparations to build and sustain our own STEM empires. Like, we want an automobile company too. You know, we want to have an airline company too. Why are there no people of color airline companies in the United States, right? And we want to do things much greater than that. We want to be the folks who cure cancer, which is a benefit to all of us. I want my software to be Black and culturally affirming. And I'm still holding on to the fact that I'm going to be in a flying car before I leave this planet. So the other thing I want to say really quickly is that I don't know if working for Google and working for Microsoft, I don't really know if y'all deserve us, right? So people are really questioning their right to be in places and spaces that continue to be toxic. So I'm running out of time. I won't have time to talk about all of these, but I will say something about respecting and properly funding HBCUs, HSIs, and tribal colleges as the leaders of STEM student success for Black and brown folks. I went to the great, the wonderful, the fantastic North Carolina A&T State University, Aggie Pride for anyone on the call. More than a third of Black STEM PhD holders earn their undergraduate degrees at HBCUs, often because PWIs wouldn't take us, or they wouldn't take us without actually respecting us. So universities will hardly have any Black faculty if it weren't for HBCUs. So we need to, and STEM companies also need to understand, when you're talking about fit, somebody having the right fit, that automatically knocks out these institutions that I described below. So you're gonna have to get a more diverse, more inclusive definition of fit so we can fit in your companies. What do I see for the future? I see fear. Like, people are straight up like getting their passports renewed because it's crazy time. But I also see a increase in STEM entrepreneurship, where folks are now questioning, why am I so dependent on my job for everything? If they are making $70,000, if I'm making $70,000 for the company, how much could I be making for myself? And a few of us are really, really ready for the revolution. So with that, I end my presentation. Dave mentioned my 2 websites. I wanted to list all the people who helped me, but that would have been another 12 pages. And very lastly, so I hope you see yourself somewhere in this slide, but I also want to say I am a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, but on voting day, I will be wearing my pink and green, because as I tried to show in my presentation, everything is better with Black women. So that includes the White House too. So with that, I will stop sharing, and hopefully we have time to engage in some questions.
Thank you, Dr. McGee. That was terrific. give you a chance to take a sip there, and lots of great feedback in the chat, and we've got a couple of questions to get to as well. We want to let you know there's a lot of Aggie pride, HBCU pride in there as well. So
those are my peeps.
love for you. So we'll just go through a couple of questions here on the chat, and then go on the Q&A, and then some that came through the chat as well. And one of the most popular questions that came up was on your slides. So I don't know if you want to share contact information if people want to request the slides from you. We can put that in the chat somehow, or
absolutely. But I have to thank Lee Drews, who is my slide master guy. He's one of the university staff members. And I don't think staff get enough credit. So yes, but thank him too. That's my guy. Yeah, so I just send them to you, and then maybe you can.
Yeah, or let's see, if you want to share, do you have a website where they can contact you?
Okay. I will put these slides on my website. Please give me 72 hours to do that. I'll put them on my website, blackengineeringphd.org.
Great. Okay. So a question came in. Should mentoring for Black and Brown students include strategies for working against racism? Should we be asking students to challenge the system, or to not just to adapt?
Yes, yes and no. It is very stressful to ask students to assist in dismantling structural racism. I think it's a very tenuous position to put them in. You might be challenging your advisor. You might be challenging someone who could keep you from getting your PhD. So I would say put that burden on us as faculty. We have a certain amount of power, particularly if you have tenure. We can probably make more waves on your behalf. But if you are a student, I think the best way that you can fight against structural racism is to get your degree in STEM and rec shop as an entrepreneur. So yeah, that's a heavy burden for students.
Sure. Another question related to mentorship. What should you do if there is no woman of color available to mentor you?
So you have to widen your network. So you have to think about your network being national or even global. And this is this is not only good for mentorship. This is good for research grants. It's good for writing papers and other forms of collaboration. So now through Zoom, we're finding it is easy to connect with people who we maybe before Zoom thought we couldn't connect with. So expand your networks, go to National Black Graduate Association or NSBE or whatever is your organization, and really try to get engaged so you can actually know some people. But expanding your network is the biggest thing that you can do to try to get mentored by a woman of color.
Right. Can you speak a little on integrating culturally sustainable pedagogy in science education at both the secondary and higher ed levels?
I can't really. I deal less with curriculum, but I know the perfect person. Brian Brown out of Stanford does science education wonderfully. He just had a book come out. I would certainly refer you to do that. I will say one thing about just STEM curriculum in general. When we have classes like urban studies or African American studies, those courses are highly politicized. And they're often they're judged in that way. So they're often judged as maybe an opinion as opposed to, no, these are facts. But when we have courses like physics, thermodynamics, they're not problematized at all. And I would say all of those courses in STEM are courses in white studies, right? The foundation of when these courses were originally formed was during Jim Crow, when my grandmother could not drink out the same fountain as a white person. So this is the core and the foundation of these courses. So they've got to be changed. They are not neutral. They are not objective. They're not universal, and they're not culturally affirming. But Brian Brown is your guy for more on that.
Okay, great, thank you. Here's another question about the tenure process. So this is a question for someone who is in the tenure process at a community college.
Okay.
And a group of her cohort, who are mostly people of color, have organized themselves to work on rebuilding the process. They have the attention of the school president, the vice president of instruction, and union leadership. What policy or practice on campuses would you identify as the next target for their work? That was, I know I said a lot there.
Yeah. Policies or practices for targeting their work. I would say cluster hiring. So cluster hiring of color. So what they need is some backup. So, typically in four-year universities, I would suggest you have someone that's like full endowed chaired professor, right? And then you would have someone on the associate level, and then you have someone on the assistant level. So you have a built-in mentoring function. So I don't know what the equivalent of that is on the community college level, so I apologize for that. But I would suggest cluster hiring folks of color. So next time you need another policy, you'll be all posse'd up.
Right. We'll stick on the tenure theme here. What are your thoughts on tenured faculty who slow down progress when it comes to confronting white supremacy, whether in faculty hiring, mentoring students, or in their curriculums? And for example, white faculty who keep saying we can't lower excellence, and by that they mean they only want Black or brown students from Ivy Leagues, and they just ignore diversity and equity initiatives. What are the possible strategies there?
So again, as I outlined in my presentation, this is what we're fighting against. The DNA of the university is to not be diverse and to be elite, and their elitist standards push many of us out. One of the ways, there's very few ways to change this in STEM, because they say, well, what are we going to do with the old white men? Well, if the old white men leave, the new white men will come in, and they probably have the same ideologies, and they're also in the same system. But if you have someone in administration or leadership who can say, if we don't focus on dismantling white supremacy and we don't do these few things, right, you won't get a raise. Now, I know that sounds like, don't mess with my money, but that is the only thing that I've seen work. Like telling people that diversity will make them better, will make them more creative, innovative, like it doesn't work. Like nobody cares. I don't know if nobody cares, but it appears as though they don't care. So asking them to do it just because it's the right thing to do is not working. But if you have some kind of incentivization, like I'm going to incentivize you to make this happen, sometimes it just happens because, you're going through the motions. But sometimes in the midst of that happening, you actually have some white faculty changing their ideologies. Because how can you trip on folks from HBCUs if you ain't never met one? Like, you know what I'm saying? That this is how stereotypes work, Sure. Or if you met one and some didn't work out, now you don't want nobody no more, never. Like that's crazy.
That's a great lead into the next question here, which is about HBCUs. Mm-hmm. With such a large percentage of STEM success stories coming out of HBCUs, what would you advise a student of color, to go to a predominantly white school and break barriers, or go where they're more likely to succeed? Is it worth the discomfort in the short run for long-term systemic change?
My son goes to Tennessee State University. Well, he would have if he weren't at community college because of COVID. And he says to me that I want to go someplace where I feel affirmed, that I don't have to prove that I'm intellectually capable of being in this classroom over and over again. And then the critique is, and I got this critique when I went to HBCU, is how are you going to learn how to deal with people of different backgrounds? Look, I got the rest of my life to deal with folks of different backgrounds. I need to be pumped up and affirmed by people who believe in me. And then after that, I can take over the world. So when I left my HBCU, I thought I was the shiznick and nobody could stop me. So I think that is so much more important. But every Black person doesn't have the same kind of racial salience. So if race is not salient to them, then maybe, going to a PWI would be a good idea. But for me, I'm all about HBCUs forever.
I think we'll have time for a couple more questions. They're coming in kind of fast and furious here. So, okay. What are some ways to use your book for community engagement or policy change or advocacy initiatives outside the university?
Oh, that's a really great question. So one of the things that I talk about in my book is STEM entrepreneurship, and looking at all the organizations that do what I call equity ethic. So there's like Black engineering, Black in computing, where you have folks who are both within faculty, but are also in computing jobs at STEM firms. And they are collectively organizing for, the dismantling of racism or more diversity in the field. So those partnering with folks like that might be a good avenue. I also talk about STEM entrepreneurship. And the reason why I'm so hot on entrepreneurship is that if we have the revolution tomorrow, we have to use all of their equipment. Like, we don't have our ownership of things that we need to start this revolution, we don't have yet. So I'm really, really focused on us having our own thing and tech companies funding it. That's what I'm really on right now.
Do you think that Latinx and Black students are hurt differently by these same systems in STEM?
Oh gosh, I'm probably gonna get in trouble. So the answer is yes, because Latinx students don't have to deal with anti-Blackness. So anti-Blackness has been foundational to the experiences of Black students in STEM. In my studies, I've also found that Latinx students can sometimes co-opt whiteness in ways that Black students can't. And I'm not saying that they're actually trying to be white. One student described it's just easier for my teacher to think I'm white. It just gives me a leg up. I don't want to, dismiss my culture, but I just kind of want a smooth pathway. But I also want to acknowledge there's a history of passing in Black communities too. So this certainly isn't a Latinx thing, but I see them taking up some of those ideologies in STEM. And Latinx are typically doing 2 to 3% better than us in most across the board in most statistics.
And just being mindful of time, I think we'll probably end on this question. It's a good one and a hopeful one, hopefully. What is your dream end goal if we have a Black and Brown STEM revolution?
Well, besides achieving equity and inclusion and diversity, I don't want to say, because I don't have my posse with me. I don't have people who are LGBT. I don't have folks who are self-taught, because there's somebody who can break into this computer now that doesn't have a degree. So I would hate to try to prophesize what's going to happen in the future, because my slide says it takes that whole village to, predict what the future is. But I hope it would be the policies that I had on my policy page, where we redo the curriculum, we get reparations so we can build our STEM empire, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And then there was many questions about whether or not this recording would be available, and I'll turn that over to Mayan to describe all that. Thank you, Dr. McGee, so much for your time.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you all attending. I know we're in trying times, and I'm glad you took the time out of your day to be with me. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was a great presentation. So yes, definitely check our Book Talk website. I can share the link with you in just 1 second. And I will post it up there as soon as I get it closed captioned. Just bear with me.
I'll make a note as well. I put this in the chat, but for those of you who haven't read Dr. McGee's book, we are offering a 40% discount for those of you on the webinar today. And so you can go to hepg.org and there's a special discount code, which was shared with you in your meeting reminder. So you can find the information there as well. The discount code is BBBV20.
Thank you for that. So I just posted the link, and feel free to contact me. I will actually send an email to all the attendees and make sure that they have gotten it in case they logged out earlier. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.